The Assembly Higher Committee is called to order. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Medina.
Here.
Baker. Bloom.
Here.
Chavez.
Here.
Harper.
Present.
Irwin.
Here.
Jones Sawyer. He left. Levine. Linder. Lowe.
Here.
Santiago.
Here.
Weber. Williams. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Welcome to the first bill hearing of the Assembly Higher Ed Committee. Our general guidelines for bills heard in this committee is to allow testimony from 2 witnesses for support and 2 witnesses for opposition to speak for 2 minutes each. The first order of business is adoption of the committee rules. Do I have a motion?
Move adoption of the committee rules.
It's been moved by Mr. Chavez and second by Mr. Lowe. Secretary, please call the roll.
Medina.
Yes.
Medina, I. Baker.
Yes.
Baker, I. Bloom.
Aye.
Bloom, I. Chavez.
Aye.
Chavez, I. Harper.
Aye.
Harper, I. Irwin.
Aye.
Irwin, I. Jones Sawyer.
Aye.
Jones Sawyer, I. Levine.
Aye.
Levine, I. Linder. Lowe.
Aye.
Lowe, I. Santiago.
Aye.
Santiago, I. Weber. Williams. 10-0.
The committee rules are adopted. Thank you. We're going to take Mr. Chavez first, beginning with item 2. And first we're going to, hear from Mr. Chavez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just looking at the beginning of this committee group, some of the personalities, it's going to be an exciting time this year.
Thank you, Mr. Chavez.
Yes, sir, Chair and members. Last year, President Obama signed H.R. 3230, which, among other things, penalizes any public university or college does not grant all GI beneficiaries in-state tuition rates by disapproving the entire campus after July 1st, 2015. Current education code does not include a waiver to reduce tuition for non-residents who attend college using GI Bill education benefits. AB 13 and 27, which you had before, which we're doing both at the same time, would bring California schools in line with the federal policy for students using GIB educational benefits. This affects over 78,000 students in our system. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chavez. First, we'll act on the urgency. It requires a majority of those present. We want to ask for questions? All right. Yeah. Before we act, I'll allow for questions. Mr. Jones Sawyer. No. Mr. Levine. No. Okay. So we're voting on the motion on urgency. So we have a first, Mr. Bloom. First, Mr. Levine. Second, Mr. Bloom. Secretary, please call the roll.
We got the vote. Let's go.
Medina.
Aye.
Medina, I. Baker.
Aye.
Baker, I. Bloom.
Aye.
Bloom, I. Chavez.
Aye.
Chavez, I. Harper.
Aye.
Harper, I. Irwin.
Aye.
Irwin, I. Jones Sawyer.
Aye.
Jones Sawyer, I. Levine.
Aye.
Levine, I. Linder.
Aye.
Linder, I. Lowe.
Aye.
Lowe, I. Santiago.
Aye.
Santiago, I. Weber. Williams. Williams, I.
And the vote
The urgency.
on the urgency, 12-0. Urgency passes. I want to give time to people who want to speak in favor of the bill.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Medina and members of the committee. I'm Michael McGee with the Chancellor's Office for California Community Colleges, here in support of AB 13. Our support is consistent with that of similar legislation over the last several years, with the understanding that it would provide a benefit to out-of-state veterans under specified criteria. We believe, as do many of our colleges in service to our country, veterans have earned this benefit. The difference this year is that we have a new federal law, the Veterans Access to Care Through Choice, Accountability, and Transfer Act, passed last year. If we're not in compliance, our institutions would lose GI Bill education funds and the student veterans would not be able to achieve their educational goals. At a recent Veterans Administration webinar, the VA noted that only Texas was in compliance with VACA, but since then Georgia was added to that list, as other states like us are in the process of working through the details. Although there was state law passed by this body last year to align state with federal law, both measures, and including the federal bill, created uncertainty by addressing the limits on federal funds and not residency, exemptions, or status. The community college system does not have the authority to set its own fees, and this bill is necessary to ensure that our colleges can serve veterans and not risk eligibility for GI Bill education benefits that include tuition and living expenses. Tuition and subsistence can range from a few $100s per month to several thousand per month. It would be a huge loss to the students, colleges, and the state if they were to become ineligible. We have approximately 60,000 veterans at the community colleges. This number is several times that of the other two systems of higher education combined. While 60,000 students is a large number, it is less than 3% of our student population. We estimate we have approximately 800 out-of-state veterans, which is a fraction of a percentage of the amount of students, but an important constituency that our system wants to serve as its own. Anecdotally, we find that these veterans are connected to California by their spouse or fiancé, and generally, when military members separate from service, they return home. And although California has the most veterans in the nation, we do not have a greater percentage relative to our population. We don't anticipate this changing because other states like ours must become compliant with VACA and align our state laws with federal law in order to receive GI Bill education benefits. We thank you for your consideration and encourage your aye vote.
Mr. Chairman, members, Pete Conatee, representing the veterans groups listed in support on AB 13, and we've been pursuing these issues for a long, long time. I just want to leave you with two things. The federal government for education, vocation, and rehabilitation spends $1.6 billion in the state of California. That goes to pay for tuition, and it also goes to pay for a housing allowance, which allows our veterans to live and not have to work while they're going to college. The other point I'd like to make is because all the other states will be coming into compliance, it's not as if California will become a magnet for out-of-state veterans to pay because in the past they've had to pay out-of-state tuition. By removing this barrier does not mean that all of a sudden California is going to become a magnet for veterans from out of state. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and members. Mark McDonald, McCallum Group, on behalf of a number of local community college districts, Kern, Peralta, San Diego, South Orange County, and Yosemite, also in support of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone speaking in opposition? Anyone else want to speak on in favor?
Mr. Williams has a question.
Question, Mr. Williams?
So if I understand the situation, is that the GI Bill covered cost of tuition for the most part in both the community college and the UC and CSU, including non-resident tuition to a certain threshold.
Well, okay, they would pay only up to the state resident tuition. If you were an out-of-state student, a veteran, you came here and were paying out-of-state tuition, the federal government will only pay up to the in-state tuition. So the additional money would have to be paid by the out-of-state veteran.
So the the GI Bill never paid more than the base small fee at the community college worth of financial aid to a community college student.
I think in the beginning they might have paid out-of-state tuition in the first year. I see some head shaking, but they quickly caught on to the fact that that would be a tremendous expense to the federal government. They also did away with paying in between semesters, and they did away with paying in the summer break. So they're really making it tough on the veterans. So and they've limited them to 3 years to get through 3 years worth of payments, and they got to get finished in 3 years.
But that's a federal issue. It's not a state issue as far as the 3-year deal.
Yes.
In fact, there's a number of congressmen who are taking that issue on because what they do at the VA, they look at how many months they're going to buy. So they don't want to pay for summer months. But that's a federal issue, not a state issue. What you have here before you is the fact that the tuition that we were charging veterans who were from out of state was higher than the VA benefit. Basically.
And I think this legislation and the one you're about to present on is a rational response to current federal government policy. I just not completely happy with that federal government policy, but I think this is a very good and rational response, and I'll be supporting it.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? So the motion before us to pass is amended to the Veterans Affairs Committee. Mr. Levine makes this first. Mr. Bloom second. Secretary, call the roll.
Medina.
Aye.
Medina, I. Baker.
Aye.
Baker, I. Bloom.
Aye.
Bloom, I. Chavez.
Aye.
Chavez, I. Harper.
Aye.
Harper, I. Irwin.
Aye.
Irwin, I. Jones Sawyer.
Aye.
Jones Sawyer, I. Levine. Levine, I. Linder.
Aye.
Linder, I. Lowe.
Aye.
Lowe, I. Santiago. Santiago, I. Weber. Williams. Williams, I.
Mr. Chavez, your bill passed 12-0 and moves to the Veterans Affairs
And
Committee.
I understand that's AB 13 and 27, correct? Both of them?
The first one,
Okay.
13.
Want to do
But
20
we'll move on now to item 3, AB 27, and Assemblymember Chavez, if you would like to substitute your first testimony, you may.
I would like to substitute my first testimony. It's basically the same thing.
Okay.
I'll substitute my motion.
All right. Well, first we're going to act on the urgency. We'll take that as a motion to move on the urgency, and a second by Mr. Harper. Madam Secretary, call the roll.
Medina.
Aye.
Medina, I. Baker.
Aye.
Baker, I. Bloom. Bloom, I. Chavez.
Aye.
Chavez, I. Harper.
Aye.
Harper, I. Irwin.
Aye.
Irwin, I. Jones Sawyer.
Aye.
Jones Sawyer, I. Levine. Levine, I. Linder. Linder, I. Lowe.
Aye.
Lowe, I. Santiago. Santiago, I. Weber. Williams. Williams, I.
12-0, and the urgency passes. Next, we want to hear any testimony in favor.
Substitute.
I will substitute my testimony.
Thank you. Anyone want to speak against? Seeing none, the motion, I need a motion on the bill. The motion before us is to pass as amended to Veteran Affairs, moved by Mr. Linder and second by Mr. Jones Sawyer. Madam Secretary, you call the roll.
Medina.
Aye.
Medina, I. Baker. Baker, I. Bloom. Bloom, I. Chavez.
Aye.
Chavez, I. Harper.
Aye.
Harper, I. Irwin.
Aye.
Irwin, I. Jones Sawyer.
Aye.
Jones Sawyer, I. Levine. Levine, I. Linder. Linder, I. Lowe.
Aye.
Lowe, I. Santiago. Santiago, I. Weber. Williams. Williams, I.
12-0. Mr. Chavez, your motion, your bill AB 27 moves to the Veteran Affairs Committee.
Thank you very much, members, for the veterans.
Thank you.